Okay, we'll kick off the event this evening. I just want to say welcome everybody to CIWEM Northern Ireland event on Decarbonising Northern Ireland Railways. This is our first of our webinars for the year that I've been in charge. I'm Michelle, I'm the chair of the branch this year. And this is part of our Emergency Adaptation and Resilience series. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Rashid. So this event is going to be recorded and they'll be put up onto our YouTube site. So anybody who wants to have a look, who maybe didn't get along tonight, it'll all be available for you. If you have any technical issues, please let us know and we can try and help you via the chat feature. And it will take your questions at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to put up a question, please do. We can get those at the end. So this will contribute to about an hour's worth of CPD, but we don't get certificates out in CIWEM. So on to the next slide, please, Rashid. So just a bit about CIWEM. For those of you who aren't aware, we're a Royal Charter Professional Body. We have a Northern Ireland branch, so this is our first event of the year. My year in charge is about Northern Ireland, our water, our environment, and our place. So I was very delighted when Mark contacted me to get involved in the year of events that we have. You know, Translink is a very unique place like Northern Ireland. We have our own very own railways, and that's the only ones we have. So it's very good that Mark has come along to tell us a wee bit about what we're doing here. So just another wee piece of work we are doing. Tomorrow there is an event, a workshop in Belfast on chartership. So Rashid's going to put the details of that in the chat. Just if anybody wants to come along, you're more than welcome. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the chartership journey, with some really good speakers, including people who have recently went through the process and those who do the chartership interviews as well. So just if anybody wants to get involved, please let us know. So on to the next slide, please, Rashid. So that's another just a little bit more about CIWEM and who we are. We're across the whole world, so it's a great organisation to be part of. On to the next slide. So we're going to hand over now to Mark McGuigan. So Mark is Translink's head of rail decarbonisation electrification process. So he's going to give us a bit of an update as to what they're planning to do. I'm sure most of you who are online, who are from Northern Ireland, will know about our brand new transport hub. There will be a presentation on that later on this year. But Mark is obviously looking at the Translink from the electrification of our railways. So there's some really good stuff going ahead, and I'm really excited to hear all about it. So I'll hand over to Mark now for his presentation.
Cheers. Thanks, Michelle. Can everybody see that, or?
Yep, that works well.
Yep. Okay. Just I suppose a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about this evening. So going to start with a bit about Translink, about the drivers and benefits of rail electrification, a bit about the technology we've selected and why.
I've lost your
All right.
video,
Yep.
your
Sorry,
presentation.
folks. Sorry. Yep. I lost, crashed out there for a second. I will just let me know when you can see that again.
Yep, that's you back. Thanks,
Brilliant.
Mark.
Thank you. Yep, and then a bit more detailed, sort of the work, the more detailed work is done on the Belfast to Border route, which will be the first route we're proposing to electrify. A bit on the the challenges we're facing, and next steps. So starting with Translink. Translink is unique within the UK in that we operate both bus and rail services. We're an arm's length body reporting to the Department for Infrastructure. And the mechanism by which we provide public transport is through a public service agreement, which is renewed about every 5 years. We have approximately 4,000 staff. So we're one of the largest employers in Northern Ireland, but much wider than that, we support probably over an additional 6,000 jobs in terms of our supply chain. We operate 13,000 services a day. We have a fleet of 1,400 buses and trains, and 80 bus and rail stations and halts. Our rail network isn't the largest, really, about 200 miles of track. but within that, we have a significant number of assets. Some of the issues we have with the network is that there's only about approximately half of it is actually dual track. The rest of it is single track with passing loops, and that does give us some issues in terms of network capacity. We've launched a couple of years ago, we launched our 2030 Better Connected strategy. And really that is focused on a vision and a mission statement, which is there on the screen you can read. I suppose just four key areas there, which we're focusing on to deliver that vision and that mission. And really that's around our customer focus, connecting communities, continuous improvement, and addressing climate action as well. We also published another document, probably about 2020, and this is our climate positive strategy. So we have ambitious aims to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, to be net zero by 2040, and to be climate positive by 2050. And in terms of doing that, I suppose our biggest carbon emissions does come from the tailpipe of our fleet. On the screen there, you can see our roadmap to decarbonise our fleet. And this started about approximately 10 years ago when we were continuing to buy diesel buses. We were ensuring that we were purchasing the lowest emission vehicles that we could. And there was European legislation and regulation in relation to that. More recently, the early 2020s, we did purchase some initial battery electric vehicles and some hydrogen buses. And we've continued to do that in recent years. Our aim is to replace approximately 100 buses with net zero buses every year. In terms of our real decarbonisation journey, which I'll talk about in more detail as we progress, I suppose really our first milestone really is going to be the new enterprise fleet. That will come as a tri-mode, so we will have some electric traction on there for the area south of the border that's already been electrified. We will have battery on board as well, but it will mainly still rely on the diesel engine until such time as the route is electrified, at which point that diesel engine can be dropped out and it will become fully electrified. And again, you can see then we have further targets as we progress, both around our coaches, further train fleet replacements. So that's an overlook of our journey to net zero by 2040. Again, these are just some of the vehicles that we currently have. At the minute, we have somewhere in the region of 220 electric vehicles in our network. A lot of these are based around our urban centres, just due to the range of the battery technology at the minute. But we continue to monitor technology, and we'll hopefully roll that out then to some of our Gold Line services. In terms of Translink and our ambition for the future, in terms of the railway, the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review was published last year. And again, this was authored by the Department for Transport in the south and Department for Infrastructure in the north. We obviously had a key input into that and have welcomed the recommendations of that. For Northern Ireland in particular, that meant it recommended the decarbonisation of the network as a short-term ambition. But it also recommended the reopening of a number of the old historic lines, namely Portadown to Armagh, with potential future links to Monaghan, Clones and Cavan. Reopening of the Portadown to Derry Londonderry route with stations in Dungannon, Omagh and Strabane. Reopening of the backline, as we call it, between Knockmore and Antrim, with a connection to the international airport. And also a potential route from Newry direct to Lisburn down, I suppose, parallel with the A1. And again, that would enable us to reduce journey times of the Belfast to Dublin service. So just going a bit more, I suppose, into the topic of tonight's presentation, which is on electrification of the railway. I always like to start with the drivers. Why are we aiming to do this now? And really, the key driver is our fleet. The majority, sorry, not the majority, the entirety of our fleet needs to be replaced by 2040. The enterprise, the tenders have recently come back for that. We're proposing a new fleet of trains, new trains 4 in somewhere between 2030 and 2032. And then the entirety of our fleet, the Class 3000 and the Class 4000 fleet, needs replaced by 2035 and 2040. And when we're thinking about new fleet, we'll have a key decision to make, and that is on the traction that those trains will have. I suppose there's a few key things we have to think about there. One is obviously whole life cost, to ensure we give value to both our paying passengers and the taxpayer. The second key area is train performance and customer experience. Our network utilization strategy back in 2021 identified that actually our trains, we needed better performing trains. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our network is single track. To get more trains on the track, we need faster trains, and we need more frequent trains. So the performance of the train allows us to get more trains down the same piece of track during peak hours. And then the final piece is the net zero piece and our requirement to comply with the Climate Change Act. But it just isn't about, most people think it is just about the climate change piece. But when we look at Europe, we can see that they have been actually electrifying their networks for years. There's a lot of very high percentages of networks which have already been electrified. And that is down to the fact that it just doesn't deliver net zero. It reduces journey times, it increases network capacity. Electric trains are more reliable than diesel trains. It improves air quality. It also reduces noise. Electric trains are lighter than the diesel equivalent, so it puts less wear and tear on our track assets. So yes, there are reasons beyond net zero as to why we would electrify our network. As well as that, there is the modal shift element. We don't have a lot of trains, so that isn't a lot of diesel emissions really when you compare it to the private car and HGVs. But the biggest contribution we can actually make to decarbonisation in Northern Ireland is actually getting more people on our trains, enabling that modal shift. But to achieve a significant modal shift, we need to make our train services more attractive to our passengers. And again, we do that through reducing the journey times, increasing network capacity, and improving reliability. And all of that can be achieved by electrifying the railway network. Our proposals align with a lot of key legislation and Northern Ireland documents out there. Yep, obviously the Climate Change Act 2022. It is mentioned specifically in our draft programme for government. It's also mentioned in our investment strategy for Northern Ireland and the Green Growth Strategy. And again, the Climate Change Committee plans very clearly state that they expect the rail network in Northern Ireland to be, the majority of it to be decarbonised and electrified by 2050. But we didn't just immediately jump to electrification. We did actually do a piece of work in the background before we made that decision. And thankfully, there's been a lot of work done within GB in this in recent years. There was lots of reports, lots of things we could rely on in terms of a bit of background reading. The table on the top right, at the top of the screen there, is one that's been reproduced in many documents in recent years. Across the top, you have the various traction technologies available. And down the left-hand side, you have the rolling stock category. I suppose at the minute, we're probably on the line between A and B because we do have speeds on our network up to 90 miles an hour. But we have ambitions to go to 100 and beyond 100 in the next few years. In fact, the new enterprise train that's coming has been spec'd for a minimum of 110 miles an hour. So when you look across the line there, it really does rule out battery only. It rules out hydrogen, and really are looking at electric traction of some description. The graph at the bottom isn't the clearest, but really that's been again reproduced in many of the reports. And what that demonstrates is that when you consider the technologies, once you get to a service frequency of somewhere in the region of 3 to 4 trains per hour, electric traction is the most delivers the best benefits in terms of whole life cost. And again, in terms of our ambitions for being net zero by 2040, we looked again at our counterparts in the rest of the UK. Department of Transport have said they're looking to remove all diesel trains from the network by 2040. Transport for Scotland are more ambitious. They're hoping to do that by 2035. And again, Wales is 2040. So we really we're just aligning with our counterparts across the rest of the UK. So we looked at various traction technologies and the advantages and the disadvantages of each. In terms of electric trains, pure electric trains or trains with maybe a small battery on it, there are definite advantages. As I've mentioned before, reduced the performance allows us to reduce journey times and increase capacity. They are very energy efficient. It is a proven technology, and the trains themselves are cheaper to purchase, cheaper to run, are quieter, and as I mentioned, the reduced weight reduces the wear and tear on our track assets. The disadvantage is obviously we have to construct the overhead line equipment, and that comes with a high capital cost, and there's also the disruption required to construct that. When you look at hydrogen and battery, obviously the advantages are you don't have that high upfront infrastructure capital cost and the associated disruption. But the disadvantages are that these trains currently are significantly more expensive than the equivalent diesel train, and more expensive to operate. The performance isn't as good as the electric trains, and you still continue to carry about the fuel required. So there will be onboard space required for batteries or hydrogen storage. A lot of the technology here, particularly around hydrogen, is still fairly experimental and under development. Hydrogen in particular has a poor energy efficiency, and battery-only trains have a limited range. And although we have opted for electrification, we haven't ruled out either of these technologies totally. As we progress, we will continue to monitor how the technology continues to develop before we make a commitment to the projects. I'll talk a little bit more about the opportunities for the battery-only units at a later stage. So what we did is we took that information and we sort of overlaid that onto our network, the length of our routes, the gradients of some of those routes, the frequency of our services. We looked at the robustness of the maturity of the technology, energy efficiency, whole life cost, and the lessons learned across the wider rail industry in terms of decarbonising networks. And that study allowed us to make some initial conclusions. One, that yes, electric traction or some derivative, for example, battery electric, was the preferred solution. That we should go for a 25,000 volt AC system over an equivalent 1500 volt system, which we could have used. But it opened up the opportunity for discontinuous electrification. And really, if you look at the wee diagram in the bottom right-hand corner, there are opportunities where we have a number of issues with low bridges where we can't get the cables through. If we have a series of those bridges, it may be more cost effective for us to actually to drop the pantograph, run on battery through those sections, and then when we can get the wires back in again, then raise the pantograph and continue the journey just on the electric traction. So again, that's something we've taken on board. All that early work we wrapped up into our real decarbonisation strategy. And that did align with the outputs of the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review, which was recently published, and also the draft All-Ireland Rail Decarbonisation Strategy, which has recently been produced as well. So I suppose specifically looking at the Belfast to Border route, this is the first route we have selected to do a more detailed study on. That route has been selected because it's obviously the key route between Belfast and Dublin. It also is our largest commuter market. It's 34% of all passenger journeys. So we have undertaken this study, and we managed to get some funding from the DF, Department for Transport in Westminster. They had a union connectivity fund available, which we were successfully bid for. We got £3.2 million from that fund, and DFI kindly topped that up with an additional 600,000 of funding. And the core scope for the study was really looking at a number of electrification options, full electrification, and a number of discontinuous options as well, where we can run on battery for the more difficult areas to electrify. That report was completed in September of last year, and we also produced a strategic outline case, which was submitted to the department in January of this year. I suppose before we go into a wee bit more detail on that study, it's important to note that the cost of an electrification project, only a third of that cost is actually associated with the overhead wires, and the support structures and the substations. An awful lot more of the cost is actually associated with clearing the route to enable the construction of the overhead line equipment. In particular, overhead bridges, a lot of them don't have the clearances to allow the cables through, so they have to be either replaced or modified. We have places like Lisburn. There is on the right hand side a picture of the canopy there. That canopy extends too far out over the edge of the platform, and there'd be a risk of flashover between the electric wires and the canopy, so we may have to modify that by cutting that back slightly. We also have other constraints, overhead utilities, that could take the form of high voltage NIE cables, BT cables. Again, all of those may have to be diverted. Another significant element is around the electromagnetic field that is generated from the overhead wires, because that can actually impact on our existing signaling system. So that's the signals, that's our points machines, but it can also have an impact on third parties as well. We will need to engage with sensitive receptors. For example, the Kingsbridge private hospital at Balmoral, they may have equipment in the rooms adjacent to the railway. For example, some of the MRI scanners and things like that there, which may be sensitive to that electromagnetic field, and we'd have to work with them to come up with a method of immunizing that equipment against our proposals. So although I talk about a feasibility study, it really is much more than that. It's a multidisciplinary assessment of the impact of electrification. So it's not just one report. To date, we've produced over 50 individual reports and outputs associated with that study, and there's a list of a range of them on the screen, which I'll go into in a wee bit more detail. The first thing I mentioned is obviously the overhead structures and having enough clearance to get the wires through. So for each bridge along the route, we did an assessment of the clearances. And where we couldn't get the wires through, we looked at a number of different options, whether we could lower the track or whether the bridge itself might have to be replaced or modified. For other locations, we considered other options. On the map on the right hand side, the orange line there is the existing bridge. This is a location near Dunmurry. That bridge doesn't serve a great, it only serves a few houses, but more importantly, it actually serves a couple of nursing homes, which require 24/7 access for emergency services such as ambulances. So in that location, we considered the yellow line there is maybe a temporary access road, or possibly as a permanent solution, which would enable us then to get rid of the bridge altogether. So when we looked at the route for full electrification, we reckon that there's 21 structures where we need interventions. That's a combination of bridge redecking or track lowers. And then for the various discontinuous solutions, we can avoid some of those bridge interventions and significantly reduce the capital cost. We have availed of innovation that has happened in the industry in recent years. The photograph on the right-hand side there shows a device called a surge arrestor. And what that does is it allows you to significantly reduce the air clearance between the wire and the bridge. I think that allows us to reduce it down from somewhere in the region of 600 millimeters down to 200 millimeters. So it allows us to get the wires under a significant number more bridges than would have been permitted a few years ago. When we look at the bridges, we also have to look at the parapets. So obviously, what we don't want is people being able to reach over, people standing on the bridge being able to reach over and potentially be electrocuted by touching the wires. And I suppose a key interface in all of this is actually that the vast majority of those overbridges don't actually belong to us. They are DFI road bridges. So again, we've had to have significant stakeholder consultation with DFI as to how we would go about these works. Another key element, I suppose, is around the grid connections we require, and we've done quite a bit of traction power modelling. Although we say it's a 25,000 volt system, it isn't a consistent 25,000 volts. We have trains on the network at all times. Some of those trains are accelerating and drawing more power than others who are coasting along at line speed. Also, when we're braking, we're regenerating energy as well and feeding that back into the system. So a lot of modelling needs done to ensure that the voltage and the current remains within specific limits. We also have to look at if we lose a substation, how could we operate with one out of action? So we do modelling for that as well. And what that has allowed us to do in consultation with Sony and Northern Ireland NIE networks is identify a number of locations on the Belfast to Border route where we could locate our substations. Two locations have been identified. One is at Lisburn there near Knockmore, where we're proposing to build the Lisburn West Halt in the next few years. There's an additional piece of land there we could utilise. And the second location is actually in Newry at the back end of the existing car park at the station. I mentioned the discontinuous solution, but we looked at that in a bit more detail in terms of how we could operate that. Obviously, if you're hurtling along at 90 miles an hour towards a bridge which you can't get under with your pantograph up, you need to figure out how you're going to tell the train to lower the pantograph and ensure that that's done in sufficient time before you reach the overstructure. And actually, when you look at that, at 90 miles an hour, between a preparation zone, a changeover zone, and a safety zone, it is actually a significant distance, which could be up to 2 kilometers. We also looked at if we're areas where we have no overhead wires and we're just simply running on battery, if there was a signalling issue, if there was a tree down in the track, how long would that battery still be available? How long would there be energy within that when we're having to continue to run lighting, heating, or ventilation before we would have to potentially go in and tow that train out if the battery was fully drained. We looked at how the whole system could be controlled. We would have to build an electrical control room somewhere. So again, we looked at sort of the resource would be required to operate that. We also looked at various layouts, and we've identified a room adjacent to our new signalling control room in Lanyon Place where that could be located. We did a desktop environmental constraints report, looking at everything from the impact on air quality, cultural heritage, ecology, contaminated land, hydrology and flooding, noise and vibration, the impact on landscape and visual, and traffic and access. And this has identified a number of key constraints. We have some historic structures along the route. At the very bottom there, you can see the Craigmore Viaduct in Newry. So again, we would have to be very sensitive to how we would electrify that, where we would place the masts. And it has been done elsewhere, but again, this would be a new request in Northern Ireland to our colleagues in NIEA, and we'd have to work very closely with them developing a solution for that. We looked at planning and the implications of that, so identifying which of the assets we could construct using our permitted development rights, which assets would actually require planning permission, but more importantly, what the strategy would be. The Belfast to border route actually passes through 4 council areas, so that could be potentially 4 different planning applications. And if one of those was delayed for whatever reason, it could actually delay the entire project. So we did also consult with DFI Planning, and they have recently confirmed that they would deem this a regionally significant project. So that would be called in, and it would be a single application, which we believe is the correct approach. We looked at again desktop exercise on the geotechnical assessment, and again this is really around identifying the foundation type which would be required to support the masts and the wires. So that work was undertaken. The preference is for steel-driven piles rather than trying to get concrete to remote locations on the network. And thankfully, the ground conditions do appear favourable, that up to 95% of those foundations can be driven steel pile foundations. Obviously, electrifying the rail network, putting 25,000 volt cables above passengers' heads in the station over level crossings does introduce a new risk. So we have done a full risk assessment and a hazard, and we've identified those risks and documented them, and we can work through those as the project progresses to ensure they're fully mitigated. Obviously, we are conscious of the carbon impact. Yes, we are reducing carbon emissions from our diesel fleet by electrifying, but also we have to be conscious of the fact that there will be a lot of embedded carbon in the infrastructure we construct. So we've done an initial carbon assessment that has allowed us to identify, I suppose, the key areas we need to focus on. There is a lot of steel, potentially concrete. So this exercise has allowed us to at least be aware of that. And there is a lot of innovation going on in the industry. At the bottom there, you can see that as a composite mast. So again, lower carbon, but also much lighter and therefore easier to actually construct. And again, there's now composite cantilevers being developed. So we've had a look as well at what the actual overhead line system would look like. We have had to determine what standards we would apply and also what system. So we have close working relationship with Network Rail. So we have decided to run with their standards and also their approved UK Master Series. We've developed an indicative BIM model just to understand where potential mast locations would be, and this has allowed us to identify constrained locations on the network, for example, where the rail corridor is quite narrow and where we might potentially actually require some additional land to be able to construct the electrification infrastructure. But this model has also been really useful in terms of allowing us to refine our capital cost estimate, and has also been really useful in terms of getting a good output from our early contractor involvement. That early contractor involvement took a number of forms. We obviously are looking for a strategy as to how we construct this. This will be constructed on a live railway. We won't have the opportunity really to shut it down for months on end. So we were looking for a bit of a steer as to whether this could be, our proposals could be constructed at night, just between 11 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning when trains aren't operating, or whether it'd be more beneficial maybe to take a series of weekend blockades or maybe utilizing periods around Christmas or Easter. They also looked at track access. Obviously, a key element of this is logistics and getting all the foundations, getting all the masts and the wiring, etc., to to the locations. So we need to understand where we have existing access points and where we may require additional ones. They identified the yellow plant we may require to both construct but also maintain the assets. And again, they brought their expertise to help us in identifying the new competencies which would be required in Northern Ireland as well to operate and maintain this, and also potential training facilities which would be required for our staff. Another key element of this is the business change aspect, and this would be probably one of the most significant changes for Northern Ireland Railways and Translink that's been seen in generations. Obviously, if we have a new maintenance department required, we're going to require depots, compounds, staff. I've mentioned competencies in yellow plant, and also a brand new supply chain, which currently doesn't exist in Northern Ireland. In terms of safety, all of our personal track safety training would need updated. Our safety management system would need updated. We would have to introduce a new procedure for taking isolations at night before our workers could get out on the track to do maintenance of our S&T and our P-way assets. So there is a significant piece of change here, including the relationship between our signalling control room and a new electrical control room. And throughout this project, to date, we have done a significant amount of stakeholder engagement. I have mentioned the discussions with Sony and NIE Networks, and that really has been very positive to date. They have worked very closely with us. The power supply we require is unique. The trains only utilize one phase of the three-phase supply, so that will leave an imbalance in the overall grid network. But they have worked with us to identify locations where that could be accommodated. They have adopted standards from within GB for rail electrification. So yep, that's been very positive. Obviously, we've liaised closely with our sponsor department, the Department for Infrastructure, both in terms of their colleagues within DFI Roads, in terms of the overbridges. I've mentioned the planning consultation we've done. Our funders in the public transport group, but also the safety authority within DFI, and we've also presented to the utilities committee as well. Obviously, the route is a cross-border route, so we have to be, as usual, we have a very close working relationship with Irish Rail, and again, so we have to understand their electrification proposals on the route and ensure those are aligned. But again, we are starting from scratch, so we have tried to avail of good practice, industry innovation, and what's done elsewhere. So we have spoken with Network Rail at a number of locations. We have been over to see live OLE schemes over in South Wales and the Transpennine route. There's a lot of documentation and reports out there on Great Western and the lessons learned from that. And again, we've engaged with potential future supply chain, the likes of Keltbray and SPL Power Lines, some of the manufacturers of the equipment, and Siemens and Hitachi. So that has actually been very beneficial in terms of us understanding electrification better and the challenge ahead of us. So all of those various areas were investigated and assessed, and I suppose this table just sort of summarizes the final decision that was made. Option one is full electrification. So obviously we're putting wires up everywhere, so that has the highest capital cost. Also takes the longest time to deliver, and has the biggest impact as well in terms of structural interventions. The intermediate option 1A, which is the one we went for eventually, was full electrification from Belfast to the border, but discontinuous from Grand Central Station round to York Road, where the vehicles or the trains are stabled and maintained. We have a particularly difficult piece of track ground there between Grand Central Station and Lanyon Place. The vast majority of those bridges are currently foul structures, but those bridges are also on most of our main roads into Belfast. We're talking about two bridges on the Donegal Road. We're talking about at the top of Shaftesbury Square there with the Lisburn Road and University Road split. We're looking at Botanic Avenue, Ormo Road. For us to go and try and replace those bridges would cause significant disruption, not only on the railway, but also to traffic within Belfast. So our current proposal there is to make that discontinuous. It's a low speed piece of track. So battery technology is actually perfect for that. We also looked at more widespread discontinuous electrification. In terms of operating that, it's a bit more complex. I talked earlier about raising and lowering the pantograph, and that has been proven to work. Is operational currently in the Core Valley lines in Wales, but that technology has only been proven so far at lower line speeds, maybe 50, 60 miles an hour. It's not actually in operation anywhere in terms of the speeds we're looking at on our network. So that would introduce an operational complexity and risk. So yeah, as I say, our preferred option at this moment in time is full electrification from Grand Central to the border and discontinuous round to York Road. It does come at a significant cost. Our current cost estimate, including optimism bias, is 690 million. With a delivery date, a phased delivery date between 2035 and 2038. Yep, there's just the key dates there. So we've already finished the feasibility study, submitted the strategic outline case. We would be hopeful of doing design development and getting an outline business case by 2028, starting those enabling works on the route by 2031, OLE construction by 2033, and as I say, a phased energisation on the route between 2035 and fully energised by 2038. This of course is all subject to availability of funding. So what are the program risks? Yes, I've just mentioned the funding issue. I've mentioned earlier the supply chain. So not only for the construction of the OLE and the traction power assets, but also the significant step up in spend that would be required to do the enabling works, to do the bridge reconstructions, the track lowers. We estimate that would double our spend on the railway each year for a number of years, and therefore we would need our supply chain to step up and deliver that. Grid connections we've already mentioned. That has been positive to date, but there always remains a risk that that capacity isn't there when we actually go to purchase it. And again, I mentioned the alignment with Irish Rail. Statutory approvals is going to be a key element of this. I've already mentioned our historic structures, the likes of the canopies at Lisburn, the Craigmore Viaduct. And there is quite a bit of change envisaged at the minute, but we mentioned the Ireland Strategic Rail Review earlier. So we have the cross-border line speed enhancement projects. We have ported down to Armagh, we've ported down to Derry, Londonderry. So coordinating that, aligning those, and again, particularly around funding, around supply chain, will be a challenge. So I suppose just touching on a few of those in a bit more detail. Electrification projects have not had the best of times in recent years. We've had some high profile projects such as Great Western, which went significantly over budget, and it wasn't the only project. And as a result, projects within GB are struggling to get funding. But the industry has learned from that. There has been a lot of review, a lot of reports done. The likes of the Rail Industry Association produced the electrification cost challenge. And again, this looked at the issues, it looked at the lessons learned, but it also looked at innovation. It looked at how we could deliver electrification at a much lower cost. And we're starting to see the benefits of that. Scotland is currently delivering electrification costs at 26% lower than we would have seen a number of years ago. But I suppose just looking at the some of the core issues that cause those significant cost overruns. The graph on the left-hand side, the bars in red are the is the amount of electrification delivered within the UK over the last 30 years. As you can see, it is a bit of a boom or bust scenario. We get a lot of investment, a lot of electrification is delivered, and then it drops off for a number of years. And what happens there is that you actually lose that resource, that knowledge, the lessons learned. That people, if there's no work for them, leave the industry, go elsewhere, and you don't get them back again. So it is important that if we do start electrifying in Northern Ireland, that it is a rolling programme. That allows you to retain and develop specialist skills. It enables the investment in plant. It enables an investment in innovation. And we have mentioned some of the innovation already around surge arresters. And there's been a big push in recent years to challenge the standards that the industry use as well. A lot of those standards were developed in the 60s and 70s, but since then there is more modeling available, advanced computer systems, and that has allowed us to change things and challenge some of those standards to deliver lower cost electrification. The yellow line on the graph on the left hand side there is the amount of electrification delivered by Germany over the last number of years, and they do deliver electrification at significantly lower costs than the UK. But as you can see, it is that rolling program of work. It's that consistent workforce. It's that consistent pipeline of work that allows them to do that. I have very crudely extrapolated beyond 2018 there on the right hand side of that graph to show what has happened in recent years. And because of those cost overruns, because of the economic climate at the minute, the amount of electrification being done currently has dropped off significantly. And again, you're beginning to see that boom and bust scenario. You're seeing some of the headlines at the bottom there, which have been in recent publications, where electrification projects have been cancelled. And the workforce has had since 2018 and is leaving to go and work in other sectors. Brexit. When the Brexit decision was announced, was it nearly 10 years ago now, and I was on holiday. Little did I think that 10 years later I would be negotiating with the EU on exemptions from EU regulations, developing bespoke railway standards for Northern Ireland, and actually working with our own local government departments trying to get exemptions from pieces of primary legislation. But it is the situation we're in. Because of Brexit and because of the cross-border route between Belfast and Dublin, in terms of railway regulation, we remain in Europe. The difficulty here is that actually the rest of the UK isn't. There were derogations within the technical standards for interoperability for GB, and we require some of those derogations to come back into the standards. They were removed after Brexit. So we're having some interesting conversations at the minute with the EU in terms of getting those derogations put back into the regulations. Made all the more difficult by the fact that we're not actually a member state and we don't technically have a seat at the table. The complication of the rest of GB leaving Europe and not being constrained by the TSIs is that they now have the freedom to update their standards and avail of that, and that is what they're planning on doing. Northern Ireland Railways is a small railway. We have a small number of technical staff, and so we have always relied heavily on Network Rail standards we basically adopted them on face value. We can't do that anymore because they are changing and they won't be compliant with the European legislation anymore. And the final one then, Northern Ireland legislation, we adopt our own regulations. The electrical safety, quality and continuity regs was basically word for word for the equivalent Westminster regulations, with the exception of 2 lines which give an exemption to the railway. The complication on this is that those regulations very clearly specify the height at which high voltage wires should be above the ground. They state a minimum wire height of 5.2 for the 25,000 volt cables we would be proposing to put up. I talked earlier about trying to get under bridges with reduced clearances. We would hope to bring our cables down to a level of about 4.2, so roughly a metre below what those regulations state. If we had to comply with those regulations, I think every single bridge bar 2 between Belfast and the border would have to be replaced. So we're working very closely with the departments on this. They are supportive, and we have a letter submitted to them currently to gain those exemptions back. In terms of another challenge is that I mentioned earlier, there is no electrification in Northern Ireland currently, so there are opportunities there around lessons learned, innovation, and we have no legacy systems to interface with. But the challenges of that are that there is limited competency and experience within Translink to deliver electrification. I've mentioned there's no supply chain. There is the complication that we have a unique gauge as well. The distance between the rails in Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland is different to that in the rest of GB. So a lot of the plant that our supply chain would be looking to bring over would have to go to a workshop and be re-gauged before it could be used in Northern Ireland. And we will have a challenge to employ and train staff up to man the electrical control room and our maintenance department. So just the last couple of slides then. What are the next steps? Well, the next steps are to try and secure funding for the design development phase. This isn't a small amount of money that we require. It is significant. We need to do significant surveys on the entire 55-mile route. That would include topo, re-gauging of our bridges, geotechnical, environmental surveys. So there's this, and that would allow us then to do outline designs as well for all those bridges that need replaces, those track lowers, the work required for to immunize the S&T equipment, do outline designs for what a maintenance department and depot would look like. So yeah, that's a significant piece of work in the next phase. We have received some funding. The Minister recently announced a £1 million ring fenced for the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review projects. Unfortunately, that needs split across 3 or 4 projects. So yes, we can get on with some key pieces of work, but we need a much more significant piece of funding to push this forward. And we are looking at alternative sources of funding, the Shared Island Fund, UK National Wealth Fund we've had discussions with, and we continue to liaise with the Union Connectivity Fund, who funded that initial feasibility study, to see if there's potential future funding as well. And again, I mentioned the negotiations with the EU and to get those exemptions from the regulations. So it would that's key to us going forward. Realistically, the first piece of electrification we will have in Northern Ireland will probably be at a number of our stations. There is a project coming forward for new trains 4. So this is an additional fleet of trains to meet passenger demand. And the proposal currently, this is at an early stage of feasibility, is to purchase probably about 23 car trains. And these will come as battery only. And will operate potentially in some of our shorter service routes, for example, Belfast to Bangor or Belfast to Lisburn. Purchasing those trains would allow us to push some of our diesel trains further out into the network and provide additional services. So to facilitate those battery-only trains, we would need to electrify those terminal stations. So we're looking at probably Belfast Grand Central. We're looking at Bangor and potentially Lisburn. And the target target entry date for that is in around 2030, 2032. Again, this is challenging because, again, this is reasonably experimental. The couple of pictures there, the middle one there is a system in Germany has been installed in a few places. This rapid charging infrastructure hasn't been installed on a live railway in the UK yet. The bottom photograph is a piece of kit has been installed at Long Marsden. Again, that's been trialed there, and will be hopefully installed in a live depot in the future. But we have other examples in the south. Irish Rail are currently developing constructing a rapid charging facility in Drogheda. So folks, thank you for listening tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's really interesting. You've got an awful lot of work ahead of you, I'd say, but very much a an innovative and exciting time for rail in Northern Ireland. It's fascinating to learn that there's so many different challenges. Didn't realize any of that about the EU stuff as well. That we're in and one of I suppose it's quite telling what way that our with my theme for the year, we are a wee bit unique here in
Yeah,
Northern Ireland.
yeah,
We have our own wee idiosyncrasies that all come with our different legislations and stuff. So we've
yeah.
got a couple of questions for you. First one, agreed that the customer experience is much better with electric trains, but there have been huge time and cost overruns in GB. Is the whole life cost cheaper going electric when compared to diesel?
No, it definitely is. And again, I would point back to the chart I showed about the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe has been electrifying for decades, and that's not down to, the climate emergency has only happened has really only been declared in the last 5 to 10 years. Um, all those European countries have been electrifying for 30, 40, 50 years, and it just provides a better railway. It's higher speeds, more frequency of services, more reliable, cheaper fuel costs. Just overall, yes, it is difficult when you see the upfront cost, and how we're going to tackle that challenge. But yeah, it's been proven across the world that electric is the way to go, and does deliver the whole life benefits in terms of cost.
Okay, another question for you. Will there be consideration of delivery of NI electrification using a DBFOM type model?
Yep, we're going to have to yeah, look at all the options available. Not sure if that would be available to us. We'll have to work with our sponsor department. We'll have to look at all those options that are available, and see what is the best model. But it will be considered, whether it's actually deliverable under our governance constraints. We'll have to see. But yes, it is a model that's been used elsewhere, and yeah, has to be considered.
Another question for you. Of all the challenges mentioned, what do you think is going to be the most difficult to overcome and what government support needed?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the funding, it is a huge amount of money. When you see the current economic constraints, the budget's been cut. It is the project itself will have to be. It won't be just DFI. It'll have to get the full executive support. A bit like the Grand Central. It'll have to get. It'll have to be a flagship project for the executive. It'll have to be, get support in terms of the investment strategy for Northern Ireland. So yeah, it's all around funding. It's all around how we can do that. And again, we need to work with the department ourselves. We need to look at how we can phase this best. Do we develop a rolling program that maybe spends slightly less every year, and delivers this over a longer period of time? We have to, yeah, work within the constraints we're given. But yeah, definitely the funding is going to be the biggest challenge.
One from me, just obviously you mentioned working with Sony and with NIE and stuff like that, and the very big demands that there will be if you do go ahead with this when it's all delivered. Is there any appetite for you generating your own electricity and installing any solar or any other greener technologies?
Yep. No, look, we own quite a bit of land along the track. We have been trying to improve safety on the railway for a number of years, and we do that by closing the sort of user work crossings where farmers use a crossing to access agricultural land. So over recent years, we've either built a bridge over those at those occasions, or we've purchased the land. So we have recently completed a study which has looked at the opportunities for solar panels, for wind turbines, and yeah, we're starting to develop that. So yeah, that will feed into our considerations. I think particularly around locations like the north coast, where the railway runs, because there's not big population centres up there. Therefore, the grid network probably isn't as strong, or as robust up there, or
Yeah.
won't have the capacity for us. So there's areas like that we're going to have to maybe look at slightly more innovative solutions to ensure we can get the grid supplies we require.
Okay. Another couple for you. Will it be possible to develop the more regional lines alongside with this border project in terms of resources available in
Mm.
Translink in the supply chain?
I think again it comes down to we have challenges around resources, we have challenges around funding. I think we need to the focus on the Belfast to borderline is it is our most it's our biggest commuter market, therefore it runs more trains on it. Therefore, in terms of getting the biggest bang for our buck in terms of decarbonising, it's the obvious route to pick first of all. But we need to look at a phased implementation here, how we roll this out, how we manage the funding we get, how we manage the supply chain, how we manage internal resource and training ourselves up as well. So we haven't quite the next. Sorry, I should have mentioned it. The next piece as well is to look doing the same piece of work we've done in Belfast at border, looking at the rest of the network, and that will then tie into how we phase that.
Okay. Are the feasibility reports available online?
Um, not at present, no. We
Okay.
are going to hoping to do like a public launch of the outputs of all of these studies, the all the ones that were funded by the Union Connectivity Fund. We're hoping to do that later this year, early next year. So we're hoping to have a bit of a public event, create a brochure which will outline the work we've done and the sort of allow a bit of a consultation on that.
And last question for you before we close out tonight. Have you got any links with the universities and the colleges about the development of training that you need for these skill sets?
We have not specifically with the colleges of the universities. What we are is a member of there's a HV network within Northern Ireland, which has a lot of the industry companies. It has Invest NI in it and a number of key client organizations. So they're looking at a range of issues, and one of them is training. It is resources, because obviously the whole electrification world is not just limited to rail.
Yeah.
It's charging of cars, it's solar panels, it's offshore wind. There's going to be a massive demand for skill sets over the next 10, 15, 20 years. So the industries come together at that forum to try and understand how best to do that, and they're working with organizations like the likes of Work Plus on apprenticeship schemes as well. So yeah, we're not personally working with universities, whatever, but these lobby groups and these industry groups are doing that, and we're involved in that.
Well, that's brilliant. Well, look, Mark, thank you very much for your time today and for giving us an insight into what TransLink are planning to do. It's very exciting for everybody, and I suppose as somebody who quite likes using the train from Belfast and Lisburn, I think it'll be a great opportunity. Well, thank everybody for coming along this evening. I'll remind everybody one more time, we've got our event tomorrow evening. It's not too late to get registered for that. Just come along, see us down at Jacobs, and I'll thank you very much and close the webinar for this evening. Thanks, everybody.